So, what do you do after you've had the most powerful job on the planet? Today, we're going to dive into Bill Clinton's post-presidency, a journey that spanned nearly a quarter of a century, and one he details in his new memoir, Citizen.
I mean, it's a pretty wild question when you think about it, right? One day you're the leader of the free world, making decisions that affect billions. The next, you're just a citizen. So how do you even begin to find a new purpose? That's really the central question of Clinton's second act and his new book.
And that quote right there from his farewell address back in 2001 is exactly where his memoir gets its name. It really sets the stage for his whole post-presidency, framing it not as a retirement, but as a totally new kind of public service, one without the official title, but, as he tells it, with just as much responsibility.
Okay, so this book is basically his attempt to map out that journey. He says he was determined to keep living in the present and living for the future, mostly so he wouldn't just spend all his time wishing he was still president. Let's dig into how he did it.
The absolute heart of his post-presidency has been philanthropy. He really set out to build a completely different kind of power base, one that wasn't based in government, but in global, non-governmental action.
But before he could get to all those big global initiatives, there was a much more down-to-earth problem. He was millions of dollars in debt from all the legal bills from the impeachment saga. As he says pretty candidly in his memoir, his first order of business wasn't saving the world, it was paying off his lawyers.
And it's from that initial need to make money that this huge philanthropic operation eventually grew. He created what you could call an empire of acronyms. You've got CCI for climate, CGI for global initiatives, and CHAI, the Health Access Initiative, which has been this massive force in the global fight against HIV/AIDS. The whole thing became this sprawling network for tackling some of the biggest problems in the world. And this timeline really gives you a snapshot of what that looked like in practice. He took on this role of a private citizen diplomat, In 2002, he's with Nelson Mandela working on HIV/AIDS. After the massive tsunami in 2004, he's leading relief efforts. In 2009, he's on this super high-stakes mission to North Korea. And then in 2010, you see this really remarkable moment where he partners with George W. Bush, a Republican, for Haiti relief.
But of course, a post-presidency isn't just about the new stuff you decide to do. It's also about the history that you can't just leave behind. So Clinton uses the memoir to talk about the controversies that have, defined and sometimes overshadowed his entire public life.
He talks about his relationship with Monica Lewinsky, and he says he's not trying to relitigate the past, but he felt he needed to say his piece to finally be able to let it go. It's really his attempt to write the final chapter on a scandal that has followed him for decades.
The memoir also gets into his controversial ties to Jeffrey Epstein. In a recent deposition for Congress, Clinton testified that their relationship was, quote, cordial but not close, and that it was limited to just a few humanitarian trips. But as you can see here, investigators were focused on a very different set of facts, so there's a real disconnect between his account and their line of questioning. He also tackles the pay-to-play allegations that were thrown at the Clinton Foundation. This whole idea that donors gave money to the foundation specifically to get access to Hillary Clinton while she was Secretary of State. He just dismisses these claims, which were made famous in the book Clinton Cash, calling them a slanderous hit job that he says credible journalists have already debunked.
All right, so that's Clinton's take on things. But what about everyone else? How has his second act been received by others? Let's take a look at what some of the book reviewers are saying to get a sense of that.
Well, The Guardian had a pretty sharp critique. They called the book convivial without being confidential. The reviewer is basically saying that, yeah, Clinton's a great storyteller, but the memoir keeps you at arm's length. It doesn't really reveal much about his private thoughts or deeper reflections.
But then, on the other hand, a reviewer for The Telegraph had a slightly different take, calling it an eloquent, if unremarkable, page-turner. So, not exactly groundbreaking, but this review praises Clinton's incredible recall and his insane attention to detail. It kind of suggests he was meticulously documenting everything as it happened. Now, it's not all just personal reflection. The book also sees Clinton step back into a role he's famous for, the explainer-in-chief, and he offers some pretty pointed advice to his fellow Democrats. He argues they need to actually acknowledge what people are paying for things, learn how to talk about culture war stuff, and stop pretending the border isn't a problem. This is him weighing in directly on the big debates happening inside the party right now.
So you take all this together, the charity work, the controversies, the political advice, and it all really funnels down to this one big question of his legacy and what it even means to be a public servant in an age as fractured and polarized as ours. And he sounds a major alarm in the book about what he calls the 3 Ps, which he thinks are the biggest threat to democracy today. It's this toxic mix of divisive populism, deep political polarization,
and a post-fact media world where we can't even agree on basic reality anymore.
And when faced with all that division, he offers up this surprisingly simple defense of a really hot-button topic today: diversity, equity, and inclusion. For him, he says it's not about being politically correct. He just argues it's a practical thing. Diverse groups simply make better decisions. It's a very pragmatic take on a deeply ideological issue.
Which leaves us with this final thought, right? Bill Clinton has spent 24 years trying to shape his legacy as a citizen. But in a world that's defined by the very 3 Ps he's warning us about, is it even possible for anyone's story, especially one as complicated as his, to ever really be settled for good?